Okay, I think we're live. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. Thank you for joining us at the special workshop meeting of the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board of Education. I'd like you to join me in our Pledge of Allegiance, please, our virtual Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll please stand. Be ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God, indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. All right, I need like to welcome my fellow board members and introduce them. Rachel, if you'll raise your hand. There's Rachel and Susanna Wong Ordway and Ken Mintz and Mark Jewett. There we go. So I need an acceptance of the workshop agenda, please.
So moved.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Somebody, okay, there we go. Rachel seconded it. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda will be the actual board workshop presentation, reopening together declaration. So we're going to turn it over to Dr. Malloy for the presentation.
Thank you, President Marvel. And before I begin, I just want to provide a bit of an overview of what's going to happen this evening. I will begin with an overview of this presentation. I want to state that this is a presentation that will go along with the declaration that will be sent out tomorrow, that there will be many other resources provided to our parents when we do this, and that we will have one-pagers, we will have videos, and we will have other pieces that will assist with the decision-making process. The reason I'm saying that is because I will be moving quickly through this presentation because it is very complex. There's a lot of information, and I'm going to stay at the conceptual level because everyone will have access to it. I also want to state that around 5 o'clock, Dr. Farnetano will be joining us just to answer any of your questions related to issues connected to public health. He is planning to be with us specifically to speak about the physical distancing requirement, but if there are any other questions that you might have, he will be with us for a short time. Our workshop will go from 4:30 to 5:30, and then there'll be 15 minutes for our community to be able to use the thought exchange tool to ask their questions. And then we'll have about 45 minutes to 6:30 where we'll actually be answering the community's questions, keeping in mind that any questions that we cannot answer, we will then answer in the days to come. So I'm going to start the presentation by saying there'll be a video from me that embedded that you don't need to see tonight because you're getting me in person, but that will be a part of the presentation. The contents are before you. Our guiding principles, why hybrid, how the declaration process will work, the instructional models, health and safety, and additional steps. The guiding principles remain the same. You've heard them since we began this work together. Our health and safety priority is still there. High quality instruction, providing options for our families, utilizing feedback from all stakeholders, collaborating and negotiating, and following all statutes and guidance. We are very much in keeping with all of these guiding principles. So why hybrid? Let me start there. And any of our public can certainly look on the guide that I've actually hyperlinked in this presentation. Pages 8 and 9 speak to the specifics, but Contra Costa Health Services requires that we are 4 to 6 feet apart. And because we've measured every classroom in our district, we do know that we can fit between 14 and 17 desks depending upon the classroom. And that is the reason why we are beginning in a hybrid in-person model based upon these requirements. Some have suggested that you as a board have that discretion to change it. Dr. Farnetano will be here later to speak to it, so I won't go further at this time. So how will the declaration process work? There will be 2 choices for the hybrid model or the remote model. And we will be clear that this declaration is for the rest of the year. Again, I've said it before, I'll repeat it again. I know that that is causing stress for some of our families. But the reason why this declaration needs to be for the rest of the year is because we are making this change now. There may be disruptions and interruptions for our students and for our staff, and we don't ever want to do it again this school year, which is why this is necessary. Having said that, if somebody wishes to make a change, we're certainly willing to keep a wait list and to accommodate where possible, but we need to be really clear that now is the time for the decisions to be made. For elementary, we are going to add an additional component. We still want our families to decide, I want hybrid or I want remote. But in elementary, we're going to add an additional question which says, I authorize the school principal to change my selection above if it allows my child to remain with their current teacher. I acknowledge that by selecting yes to this question, I am not guaranteed this option. So in other words, we want our families to decide. We've said very clearly to our staff that though we will be compassionate in terms of how we assign staff, that our families' declaration comes first. However, in elementary school, this might provide us opportunities to minimize disruption. The same choice does not work as effectively in secondary due to the multiple number of teachers that our students have. So the timeline is we're here today. The declarations get sent out tomorrow. The declarations are due back on Friday, November 13th. And our goal is to provide information to our families about schedules and teachers before the winter break. I never promise and underdeliver, so when we see the declarations and how complex the changes are going to be, I will communicate with the board and with the community that we can make this particular goal. It's an important one. We want to, and we'll work towards it, just like we've worked at all aspects of this reopening plan. So let's talk about instructional models and schedules. And one of the things that I will say before I start it is, again, there are many slides with many granular pieces of information regarding start times and lunch times and recess times and so forth. So I'm going to go quickly through them, not because I think they're unimportant, but I'm going to speak to them at the conceptual level. And again, realizing that the actual specifics will be available to everyone through this presentation. So when we were working on the instructional model, again, we used some pretty significant guiding principles, starting with health and safety, of course, and then really focusing on what does it mean to offer two effective options. This has been a cause for tension, I think, concern in our community that one option would be better than the other, or one option would be given more attention to than the other. We've done our very best to ensure that we are offering two effective programs. However, it still means some changes need to be experienced. But the last guiding principle on this slide is very important, which is all students will maintain the programs they started in August, because that became a very important organizer for the work that we're doing. So let's talk about hybrid. The students will be split into two balanced groups. And I'm going to just make a comment here because so many of our families are struggling with this particular piece. They say, well, if a number of kids want to be remote and there are only 15 kids who want to come back, why can't my child come back 5 days a week? And I need to add, there's another piece that's very important, which is budget and staffing. I use the average of 27 because some of our classes are a little smaller, some of our classes are a little bit bigger, but we need to create class sizes of 27. So if only 15 kids want to come back from that particular third grade class, we're going to find 12 other kids from a third grade class in the school who also may wish to be in school. And those two groups then become the class, cohort A and cohort B. If we didn't do that, it would mean classes of 15 and then other classes, if I can use the average, of 39, which we are not allowed to have. And that's an important component when people are asking us questions. For elementary, We will be using the AM/PM model. For secondary, alternate days. Mondays will pretty much remain the way they are now. And I want to be clear, the curriculum standards will be taught even in these two unique settings. Students are required to wear masks and to be 4 to 6 feet apart at school. And this will need to be strictly enforced. And as I said, teacher schedules may change. Anytime you see a remote slide, I'm just going to state it this briefly. We're keeping the program like it is now. I'm going to provide a small caveat when I get to some secondary information in a minute, but for the most part, those who choose the remote model, it will be similar to what you're experiencing now. Elementary instructional models first. And these are the big items. When we're talking about preschool, TK, and kindergarten, it's 4 days a week, either morning or afternoon for 150 minutes. Monday being similar to it is now. Obviously, classes will be much smaller because we're in a hybrid model. Asynchronous activities will be assigned for at home. And of course, there is no lunch at school in our elementary model. And these are the times that will be part of the package. County preschool, again, similar. These are the times in the package. Grades 1 to 5 will have the same idea, 4 days, Tuesday to Friday, either morning or afternoon, 165 minutes. Mondays would be similar as they are now, as I said, smaller class sizes. In school time would be English, language arts, math, and social emotional learning. At the at-home time, there will be some synchronous structure with science, physical education, and other special classes, and some asynchronous time supported by Lexia and Zern. And again, no lunch at school. And here you see the times that reflect that particular schedule. And I want to skip over that bit. What you'll see throughout is that's a video which basically will help our parents understand how kids will come into school, how they'll leave school, how they'll come into class, what the masks look like, what the desks look like, so that there's an understanding. And as I said previously, we're also going to be creating some one-page documents with videos attached around what a hybrid model looks like, what asynchronous looks like, and all the rest. So these are all resources that will be going out with the declaration. The notion of what will students be doing at home continues to be a question for many of our families, probably more in the secondary area than the elementary area, because as you can see with elementary, the kids would be in school should they pick a hybrid model 4 days a week, and there would be some structure when they're not at school. So I think that it's important to note that I think this model for elementary also helps meet the issue around, I'm worried that my youngster is having too much screen time. So there's some good balance, I think, with this particular model. And as I said, these slides will repeat themselves because depending upon where someone's child is, they might look specifically to that particular side. But fully remote will be, as I said, like it is now. And you're seeing the schedules for all in fully remote. And that's again the same with first through fifth grade, similar as it is now with the schedules. Secondary is where I think we need to be a little clearer because there are a few more complexities for us to sort out. Because of the fact that we will be keeping the hybrid schedule and the remote schedule the same, because some staff may need to teach in both and some classes may need to be offered in both. And so this is why it's very important that this particular schedule has to reflect the fact that those two groups have to come together sometimes, and I'll explain in a minute. And of course, some staff may need to go back and forth between. So Mondays will be like it is now. And then one cohort would come on Tuesday and Wednesday. and the other cohort would come on Thursday and Friday. Smaller class sizes when the kids are in school, activities that will be structured, a student support period at the end of each day, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and lunch will be at school with health and safety guidance followed. The remote schedule again, unless we have what we're calling the singleton elective. So let me stop and explain what I mean there. I've been saying that for the most part, things would remain the same, and they will. But this is where we need to fulfill the guiding principle we started. All kids will have the program they began in August, which means that some courses are so highly specialized or the credential that the teacher needs is so significant that those particular classes at the middle and high school level will be offered using video conferencing so that the kids who are studying remotely and the kids who are studying at school can both continue to participate in that class. So that's where video conferencing will be used. But for the most part, the rest of remote learning in secondary will be as it is now with your own teachers and such like we've experienced. So here you see the schedule. You see periods 1, 3, 5, and 7 on the first day. You see periods 2, 4, and 6 on the second day. You see the student support, and you see how it all will work, both for those who are hybrid and those who are fully remote. But as I said, those two tracks will be separate except for those specific electives that I've described. And you see something very similar in high school, but you see that period A is offered on Wednesday and Friday with similar periods offered as I just described the middle school schedule. And of course, here is our schedule for our adult transitions program. And there'll be a video that our families can watch should they be interested, specific to what it will look like in a secondary school. Let me talk about hybrid and at-home learning time in the secondary program, because this is where I think I've received the majority of questions, because there is a fear that asynchronous or at home means unstructured, and unstructured means we're returning to some of the experiences in the spring that people have told us they understood, everybody tried their best, but they don't appreciate. And so it will be very much communicated to our students that on their at-home days, they will be expected to be working on the coursework and assignments during that class period. So the teacher may not be there each day, but there will be structure in terms of what they're expected to deliver. In other words, there will be accountability. Secondly, though we will be conferencing in the elective courses that I just described previously, video conferencing may be used as a strategy for those who are at home while the other half of the class is at school. The reason we're using may is because, again, other schools have been using this, and there are some that believe that this is a strategy that works for everyone. What we know from an education point of view is it doesn't always work for everyone. It can work some of the time, but there are other strategies that we can use, and I'll speak about those in a minute. And we also will be very creative with the student support period, so that if students are on their at-home or asynchronous day, they would have access to the student support period on that day. And we can figure out ways to make that much more a part of the schedule. Some kids use it, some kids don't, and we would work with our staffs to really make that a strong opportunity. So here are some examples. In math, students watch a recorded lecture when they're in their asynchronous times, and they might work in small groups with peers like they do now. Students might be invited to the class when they're at home through video conferencing. Students may work on something like short stories and then collaboration with colleagues on a presentation. Students can meet with the teacher through the student support period to ask questions about an assignment. But one of the things that I think is most important here is when kids are in school, they're in a smaller group in school, and then it provides the teacher the opportunity to set up what that asynchronous or at-home day would be. And I think that, again, it's important for us to support our teachers to think about strategies they can use. And just like we provided support in July and August regarding remote, this will be the focus for our support in terms of hybrid going forward. Special considerations that we need to really pay attention to, and this is whether students are hybrid or remote. The student's teacher may change. A student's schedule may change. A student's course or program will not change. For example, if a student is in the ATP program, we guarantee that that student will be in the ATP program. If a student is in AP Calculus, the student is staying in AP Calculus. And this is where I've already spoken about how video conferencing in secondary may be used as I described. And I think that we will continue to develop and support our teachers to do that as I've suggested. Now let's talk about the other aspects of school, which we know are important. Students will need to stay 4 to 6 feet apart. Doesn't mean they can't socialize 4 to 6 feet apart, but we have to be clear about what it is. And that's in passing periods, lunchtime, recess, arrival, and dismissal. The next point is important. We know that our schools are important for our students, and we understand that they need to be connected. So we're exploring how kids who choose remote can still have access to school in healthy, appropriate ways after school time, or maybe even to see their counselor or to participate in an activity. We haven't got that sorted out yet because we really do want to work with our staff on the declaration process. But by all means, this is something that we are really working to provide for our kids. So this is part of the work that we need to do. In terms of special education, our students with special education needs, if they are, will be with their cohort when they are in our resource programs. In terms of our SDC, moderate and intensive programs, they will be in school 4 days a week like they are now in this time that we've begun on October 27th. And of course, our students in the preschool and adult transition programs would be on campus 4 days a week as well. And Marianne Freitas, of course, and others on the special ed team are here to answer any questions that you might have. But the model we're using for those who are in school now, either October 27th or November 17th, will continue. And those that will be coming back, they will be on the schedule with their colleagues, their classmates, because of some of the mainstreaming that's happening, the IEP requirements, and so forth. Health and safety is something we've spoken a lot about. And though I'm going to move quickly, I want to say to you, our board, and to our public who are watching, our reopening guide is filled with details. Here are some highlights, but these are in no way meant to be the details. You've heard about 4 to 6 feet. You've heard about the masking. Non-essential visitors will not be allowed on campus, though we are exploring, and I spoke to the PTA presidents and the affiliate presidents today, there may be some need for some parent volunteers in some very focused ways to actually assist with the safety. But we don't want to have a lot of additional adults on campus because that takes away from why we are in hybrid in the first place. So I want to say that we're exploring that because there may be some very specific reasons that we could use at school level additional help, but we haven't worked that through yet, but we'll be paying attention to it. Students will come into school and leave school themselves. In other words, families won't be coming to the door. The sanitizing piece is key. I've learned from public health that if we distance, if we mask, and if we sanitize, those are the key pillars. And of course, we're going to clean, but we also have to pay attention to the fact that we shouldn't be touching our face, and we need to be careful because no matter how often we clean, surfaces can still hold virus. And so that's why the sanitation and the touching of the face is so key. And plexiglass will be on our front office desks and our teachers' desks. The reason why we have not chosen plexiglass between student desks is because we've chosen the 4 to 6 feet. You'll hear from Dr. Farnetano if you're interested in further on why putting desks closer than 4 to 6 feet and then putting plexiglass does not necessarily provide the same type of protection that the distancing does. And of course, we've discussed that shared space, hallways, passing periods, kids won't be using their lockers to deal with the distancing piece, but the restrooms, of course, will be cleaned. The hand soap and the towels will be there, and sanitizers will be in every classroom so that kids could do what we've just been saying, which is ensuring the hand hygiene. And we will be doing this constantly. It will be part of what we teach our kids when they come back. Families will be expected to do the home health screening where they answer the questions. And if children have any symptoms at school, parents will need to pick their kids up in 30 minutes. That is a requirement of choosing the hybrid model. Our guide is filled with all the cleaning protocols and the types of cleaning supplies we'll be using, but these are some examples so that we are very clear that cleaning is very much a part of our responsibility and our commitment. I think this is really important, and when our families receive the presentation, they can click on these things. We have a decision tree in the guide, which basically tries to cover every eventuality. If someone is positive, if someone has symptoms of being positive, if there's been exposure, and so forth. The other commitment we've made is that following all privacy requirements, we will inform the people who need to be informed, and on our website, there will be an indication of any COVID in our schools. It's the only way, from my perspective, that we can be absolutely clear about what is happening. We won't be naming anybody, but we will certainly be communicating that information so that we're not, frankly, causing any further stress because people are wondering about that. Our ventilation systems are in great order. We've committed to ensuring that the filters are clean. I'm grateful to be in a district where the community has supported and the board has certainly been great stewards to the facilities because we are in great shape with ventilation, and there is more in the guide. So additional steps. The declaration goes tomorrow. It's returned by November 13th. Anyone who doesn't return will be called on Monday, the 16th, because we need to hear from every family. Each family will receive a declaration for each child, because you might make a different decision depending upon one child versus another child. If choosing hybrid, parents will be required to sign a notice and acknowledgement for return. This has the requirements around masking and distancing and health screening and such. We've talked about parents being available to pick up their kids, and we're encouraging parents to have their children tested as appropriate, but we'll be following a process where we are testing a quarter of our staff every 2 weeks as a surveillance testing, if you will, that will allow us to support or mitigate against, I should say, any outbreak. Surveillance testing is something that I've learned much more about in the last little while. So here's the timeline that you've already heard me speak of. Students who enroll after November 6th will contact their site's enrollment coordinator. And you've heard me talk about the declaration being firm. I've talked about the decisions throughout the year, and we've talked about the distancing requirements, if they change, would allow us to return full-time for those students who are in the hybrid model. You might say, well, what about the students in the remote model? But again, anytime we have to change, it means an interruption. So that's why families need to make their decisions now. There are plenty of resources that are on our website, and every one of those resources will be hyperlinked to this document that our families receive. And what we're going to do now is, well, what we've been doing is supporting our principals to become the persons who truly understand their community and can engage our families while they're making the decisions. Too often, I think we try to answer all of these questions at the district level, but the relationships are at school, and we really want and are supporting our principals to be the first place for families to go. And principals will be having meetings, and they will be having other opportunities to help our families figure out what it is they wish to do. We will also be publishing it. It'll be sent tomorrow, frequently asked questions. We've taken every theme we've heard through email, through social media, through discussions, through meetings, and we've tried to answer them. And of course, it says, please contact your child's principal first. If your principal can't answer the question, they'll contact the appropriate district staff, and we're going to continue now to work through the principal to help get to the next step. Further, we will wait for the declarations. We will determine how to minimize disruption, as I've said. We've made it clear that we cannot determine what the teachers or the staff members will do first. We cannot do that because we need to follow your lead on what you want. When I say you, I mean our parents. And then by all means, though, we'll work with our staff to be as compassionate as we can. So herein lies the points. And I noticed that Dr. Farnetano has come in just as I'm finishing, so this is perfect timing. But I'm going to close with this statement. And you know that the superintendents in the county meet every week. And Richard Whitmore in Lafayette gave me this idea, and so I'm going to quote him because it's not my quote. And he said it this way: if our families are comfortable and feel it's safe for their children to be at school, then they should come back to school. If our families, for whatever reason, maybe a family member is unwell, maybe they have their own concerns, but for whatever reason do not believe it's safe to be with other kids at school, then they need to remain in remote. We will commit to making both programs effective and as excellent as they can be. And I think the reason why I'm stating it that clearly is because I'm grateful to our board. You gave us direction to have two programs, two effective programs. I have to tell you, trying to have two effective programs adds a little complexity to this work, but it's the right complexity to this work from my perspective. So I'm grateful that you gave us this direction, but I think it really boils down now to families making their decisions based upon their understanding of the program, realizing that it is not at this point 5 days a week school as we're used to, but just like our staff did an amazing job with remote, even though not everybody agrees, I think many do, I trust that we can do the same thing with hybrid. So I'm going to stop there. And before you open it up, we open it up to your questions. I note that Dr. Farnetano is here. Dr. Farnetano, I've already walked through the presentation. So what I've shared with the board, you would be answering is why it is that we are required to do certain things by public health guidance. And then they will be able to ask you questions directly, and then I'll come back in and answer questions after you're finished. We're in pretty good time, members of the board, because we're not expected to move to the next process until 5:30, so we still have a good 25 minutes for your questions, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Farnetano first.
Thank you, Mr. Malloy. Yeah, just to kind of reiterate that point. So, you know, the state has said that, you know, counties, once they're in the red tier for at least 2 weeks, you know, are able to go back to in-person learning, but that is as long as they are following the guidance. And the guidance comes, one, from the state, and the state has guidance documents that Mr. Malloy and your team has been, you know, really closely following. And the county has guidance documents that have been jointly produced by the County Office of Education and the County Health Department. And those are, you know, essentially how to operate in-person learning in a safe fashion in the midst of a COVID pandemic. And so, you know, we meet with Mr. Malloy and the other superintendents very frequently and, you know, help them understand the guidance. But that, you know, that's the guidance that is really out there, set by, you know, health officials at the state and local levels for schools to be able to bring students back and be safe for the students, their families, and, you know, the teachers and the other staff.
So President Marvel, if I can ask that you direct trustee questions to Dr. Farnetano so he doesn't have to stay. And then after Dr. Farnetano's portion, we can go back to answering any questions about the presentation itself, if that's okay with you. You're on mute, President Marvel.
There we go. Sorry about that. All right, fellow board members, do you have any questions of our county health director? No. Mark? Nothing? Susanna? Oh, Mark, yes.
All right, try to get myself off. Two quick clarifying questions, which I think have been
Mhm.
clarified. Thank you so much for joining us, by the way. I really appreciate this
You're welcome.
opportunity. Very quick questions. If we go into a hybrid, if our county were to go back into the purple tier,
Mhm.
do we have to reclose schools, or do we remain open in a hybrid fashion?
So the state recently kind of clarified this, and what they say is that as long as a particular campus has begun in-person learning as part of an opening plan, and the state and the county moves back into purple, they can continue not only the in-person learning they're doing, but they can add more in-person learning at that campus. But it's campus specific, so it doesn't apply across a district. So if one, say, elementary school is back, but a high school is not back, they can't, when you move into purple, that high school or another elementary school that wasn't partially back can't bring students back.
And if I could add this to the board, for the board, because this is information that we just received, I think last week. So we have a plan to be sure that in phase 2, November 17th, all of our campuses are open through SDC and other programming for in-person learning, so that all of our campuses are open by phase 2, so that this is not an issue. This is information that you will be receiving shortly because we're finalizing the preparations for it. But I wanted you to know that we just received that information and we immediately worked to create a plan, and one that we will share shortly, so that all of our campuses are open and aligned with what Dr. Farnatano just said.
And I'll just add too that, we are currently in orange, but our numbers have been rising in the last week, and there's a risk that we may move into the red territory soon. And part of that was the reason we issued new health orders yesterday, instituting some of those red tier criteria for certain businesses. It doesn't affect schools, but what we're trying really hard to do is really keep our county out of the purple level.
Second question I have is, again, more clarification to bring it up to current date, is I believe there are pretty well-defined guidelines for when individual schools and districts need to quarantine based on caseload. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. And the state has guidelines about, when there is a case at a school and what needs to be done, and when that would lead to closure of a whole classroom, and at what point an outbreak would lead to a full closure of a whole campus.
And we've included all of that information in our reopening guides.
I was just going to point to that. Thank you. Thank you, John. That's it. Thank you. Again, Dr. Farnatano, thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, Ken.
Again, Dr. Farnatano, thank you very much for being with us today. The question I have goes back to, during the waiver process, when we were still in the purple phase, the size of the cohort was a critical component. And one of the key issues had to do with our staffing of those cohorts, and a staff member only being able to deal with one cohort at a time. Again, unfortunately, seeing the spikes that we are right now, if in fact we had to go back to a purple, even though you're indicating that we could continue to work with anything, can you envision anything changing relative to cohort size being an issue in addition to distancing?
Good question. So yeah, so the waiver process really had stricter criteria because this was a process for counties in the purple tier. And so it not only limited it to elementary school ages, but it had these other stricter requirements about sizes of cohorts and not mixing. What the state's been saying, which I think makes a lot of sense, is that if a county moves back into the purple tier, there are campuses that's already open, at least partially. And now the proof of whether things are working or not is really going to be, are there, outbreaks or not? And it's not, right now it's really more, we're operating on our best theory, looking at what might happen if we open up schools and setting up plans to do it safely. But once we're already opened, if those schools are continuing and they're avoiding outbreaks, then the proof's in the pudding, and their plan is working. The one change the state does say that if a county moves into the purple, those schools should be intensifying their testing regimen of staff, and testing more frequently if we move into purple, to help make sure we're quickly detecting those outbreaks, but not changing any requirements about the size of cohorts or the mixing ability of those cohorts. So if those schools are, they're following the same plan, and they're testing to be able to detect outbreaks, and they're not finding them, then there's no reason to adjust their plan.
Okay, thank you. Another quick question. Given that we have seen some local, particularly private schools, go back, I'm just wondering if here in Contra Costa, or maybe in dialogue that you might have with health directors from other counties, if you're hearing anything relative to schools and how things are working in other places.
We talk a lot with health officers across the state. We talk the most often among the Bay Area, and there's very few public schools in the Bay Area that are open for in-person learning right now, but there are more in Southern California. And we haven't seen a lot of large outbreaks in schools. There's cases, and we expect there's going to be cases, and most of those cases are brought in from the community. There are exposures that are happening, at home or outside of schools. So far we have not, fortunately, seen a lot of outbreaks that are occurring in the school setting, which is encouraging. But it's still early. Even in Southern California, those public school districts that went back, they went back in September or early October. So it hasn't been that much time. But so far it's encouraging.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Susanna.
Hi. Thanks, Dr. Farentano, for the opportunity. I have a question that's kind of piggybacking on Ken's first question about the mixed cohorts. So I know red tier and orange tier and yellow tier, it's mixed cohorts with, a particular teacher is allowed. But how about like daycare? If we go back into purple, if certain students who are, in hybrid in-person learning, and they are in the daycare, is that, how does that work? Or is it same thing with the mixed cohort, where as long as we're careful, it's allowed?
So daycare has different guidance, and the daycare guidance has requirements for stable cohorts. But we also realize that their kids are in daycare, then they go to school, then there's an after-school program, and we also know that kids are in other cohorts. They're in their family cohort, and they are doing other things outside of the school setting, and that's really impossible to control. We encourage kids and adults to minimize their number of different interactions with different groups. But it's not something the schools can control. So if someone's in a stable cohort in daycare and they're in a different group at school, that's nothing that we can expect people to restrict. And I want to recognize Heather Sodermis, who's a nurse practitioner who works on our school team, and she's here tonight too. And just want to see if, Heather, you have anything else to add about the daycare and the cohorts.
No, I agree with that. I think that it's really important for cohorts to have a very stable cohort at the daycare. So you want those kids in daycare playing and mixing with only that same group of kids at that daycare. And then likewise for their school, they will do they will have their school cohort. And if there is a case, then what we'll do is we'll do case and contact investigation for the school and for the daycare. So that's to be expected, and that's okay.
Great, thank you so much.
Hey, any other questions, Susanna?
No.
Okay, board members, you've answered I had a list of questions and you got to all to them. That's the advantage of being the caboose. So no more questions from board members. We can let Dr. Farentano go. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. You and Heather as well for coming to our workshop.
And President Marvel, if I can just say that Heather and Chris, Dr. Farentano, have given us superintendents tremendous support. We've said all along, we're not the experts and we need to learn from those who are. And I'm grateful that they were here because too often the emails sometimes come in that we or me should be making decisions outside of the guidance that has been provided. So thank you for taking the time, not only tonight, but you frankly take a lot of time with all of us superintendents and frankly school staffs every day. So I wanted to offer that thanks before you go.
Well, you're welcome. I think in the schools team, we feel in the health department, we feel it's really important to get kids back to school, but we also feel it's really important to do it in a very safe way. So we appreciate the partnership.
Yes, they do. And if it's okay, I'd like to hang around. That way I can hear your concerns, if that's okay, if I continue on. Yeah, I'd
Sure,
appreciate
absolutely.
that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. All right, we are on to trustee questions from the presentation that Dr. Malloy made. Who would like to start? Mark?
Yep. Limited time. So John, can everybody hear me or I need to turn on this? That's good. Okay.
I can hear you.
I'm going to rifle through these because we have limited time. And I apologize if this is in the reopening plan, but I think these questions from the constituents I have heard from are important to clarify tonight. Under either delivery system, hybrid or full remote, is there any risk that students will have to change schools, either in total or for individual classes?
So our goal is to keep kids obviously in their school. The place where I could see some challenge is if families want to change their declaration down the road and there may be room in a third grade class someplace remotely in the district. I can see that. Our goal is to not have that happen. The reason why I'm going to say it like that is because the only place where we could run into a terribly huge challenge is, I'm going to put it out there, what happens if 90% of the kids want to be hybrid and 10% want to be remote, or vice versa? So what I'm saying there is we endeavor not to have that happen. We're hoping that when the declarations come in, it won't be necessary. We're thinking of a lot of creative strategies so that that doesn't take place, but I don't want to say absolutely not, because as this board knows, we can't support financially classes of 10.
Right. Thank you. Second thing, cohorts A and B. I'm assuming there will be no family choice as between A and B. The reason I ask is a lot of what we've heard from constituents is social emotional aspects of coming back to campus with friends. But I'm assuming there will be no choice other than families will be in the same cohort, but there will be no family choice as between A and B.
Thank you for asking the question. We would love to offer more variables. We can't. This is already a huge crossword puzzle, and we're talking about kids' lives. And we are already doing this in a focused and fast way. So no, unfortunately, those other potential requests around, I really need AM or I need PM, certainly we can do wait list kinds of things, but that can't be part of the variables we ask our principals to wrestle with while we're trying to get to schedules for January 5th.
And this is all going to be driven based on the declarations. It's not going to be alphabetical. It's not going to be based on numbers. It's going to be based on classes, based on declarations.
100%.
Yeah, got it. Okay, just want to make that clarify. Touch a little bit on the asynchronous. I just want to make sure that I fully understand how we're supporting teachers, because there are going to be now teachers delivering in class and responsible for the asynchronous part of the day during the same day. How are we helping and making sure that we're going to have the asynchronous part of the day delivered with rigor?
So one of the things that as teachers, we always do, there is teacher directed time, and then there's small group time, and then there's individual time. And even when we're in normal school days, there is an expectation that we're using those different strategies. And when we're using small group time or individual time, the expectation is those learning tasks are pretty complex. They're still fulfilling instructional requirements, and it is true learning. What we will need to do with all of our staffs, and you know what, we've already been hearing from our teachers. We've got a video that's going to go out to explain some of the ways hybrid can be done. We know that our teachers can do this, but we're going to support them to do it more effectively. I think the difference is whether the student is with their teacher on that asynchronous day because the teacher chooses to use the video conferencing, or whether the student is expected to work in a small group with 4 other peers on a pretty complex task that's due the next time they meet, or whether the student is going really deeply in a complex problem that is requiring all kinds of research that will then need to be turned in as soon as that class sees each other again. That's where we will be supporting teachers to build in the accountabilities. So it's not like 2 free days. Because to be honest, especially for our 11th and 12th graders, and I've said this before, college is asynchronous.
Yeah.
So we need to keep in mind that there's no college professor that's with kids 5 days a week for the most part. There are some institutions that are smaller that have a little bit more of that. So again, we know that this is the focus of the work that has to be done.
Yeah, I fully agree, but asynchronous goes all the way down to 6th grade, but fully agree with you. I get it. I think we've gone into asynchronous enough tonight. Let me talk a little bit about mask and social distancing. How are we thinking about enforcement?
It's going to be this clear. Families are going to are going to see the declaration. I'm going to call it a declaration. It's got a different name. Forgive me. It's not up that they have to sign. You need to do these things. I said to the parent leaders today, and I'll certainly want to say this to all our community that's here. If you know your kids can't do this, the masking and the distancing, then I think that's going to help you make a decision regarding what you need to do, because we have to be strict. The reason we have to be strict is you just heard Dr. Farnitano. Others will be sending their kids to school because they're expecting those safe conditions. And we cannot have teachers continuously saying, put your mask on or step back. So, certainly we're going to do the compassionate thing, but if there is a repeated offense, the principal's going to have to call the parents and say, this isn't working. And we have to be that clear. And I hope that families are understanding that we're not trying to be ridiculous or rude. We're simply needing to do that so that the next 6 months don't become, frankly, put your mask on, as opposed to real instruction.
Yep. What happens if a child presents symptoms on campus? I know there's going to be an immediate call, but what are the protocols on campus once a child presents?
So again, I'm going to just go back to that slide without taking a lot of time. We worked with a community of physicians who happened to be parents in our schools, and we worked out a decision tree, if this, then this, and it's all listed there. So I'm not going to try to use it now. If there's exposure, if there's a symptom, and so forth.
Good. Sorry, last question I have, and then I'll defer, is asynchronous time. There's going to be no attendance requirements during that time.
So as I said, with some secondary classes where they happen to be the electives, that attendance will be taken as required. There are, under California law, we can count asynchronous time as instructional time without attendance taking, as long as we value the amount of time that kids have to be working on the particular learning test. So no, it wouldn't be the same attendance every single period like kids are experiencing now.
Okay, I'll defer. Thank you very much.
Okay, John, just your issue of being strict, you're following the model that state of Florida implemented with many of their districts, as I recall, and they've not had a huge incidence of increases. It's actually gone down among school age kids in Florida, but that's because they're being very strict.
Yes, I can say that studying the United States, the places where there have been no issue is a strict adherence. The places where there have been issues, there isn't a strict adherence. And so that's why for us to be safe and to support our staff and students, it's required.
Okay, next, who'd like to ask other questions? Rachel. No. Ken?
Sure. Just a quick question. It's actually a small one. It has to do with the grab and go lunches, particularly at the elementary school level. How does that work in terms of they're not going to be eating at school, but if you're like in an afternoon, when would you pick up a lunch? And, can you get into just a little bit of logistics of how that program works with the AM, PM schedule?
Thank you, Trustee Mintz. Danny, could you help us with that particular question?
Sure. For the AM students, it'll be a little easier. They'll be dismissed for their lunchtime and they'll pick up the lunch on their way home and they can eat it at home. With our PM students, it's a little bit more logistically challenging. One of the things we want to make all of our families know about is that the USDA has essentially extended the free for all. So if you are a student under the age of 18, you can pick up food. There's no paperwork to fill out. You can come pick it up, and it's not an issue as far as on the days that every 2 days, I think, is they give out several meals on one day to cover 2 days. So if you have a PM, there's one of two solutions that we're working on. One would be that they would come a little early and eat, but they could also come during the distribution time. So as an example, if they came to the distribution time on a Monday and picked up the food for Monday and for Tuesday, they could eat at home using the food we gave them on Monday for Tuesday. If the family, that works into their schedule. And then we have several different distribution centers within the district that if that's what they need, we'll get it to them. And we want them to be able to, as much as possible, take the food that we are providing, but then eat it at home to the extent that they can. If we have an extenuating circumstance where that's not possible for a family, we know that families can talk to principals about that, and we'll work out something to help that family.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I'm just thinking in terms of elementary school kids and the need for snacks and making sure that families are clear. If they're a PM, they may need to feed their students before they come to school, or work out logistically how they would pick up the grab and go and when that would be eaten. The other thing I want to talk about real fast, it's more of a statement or a comment than a question. This past weekend, I had the opportunity to talk to 3 students from up in Placer County, where about a month ago, they went into hybrid mode. And and I learned a whole lot from them. I actually sat and interrogated all 3 of them. It was 1 middle schooler and 2 high schoolers. And things like lunch periods during secondary, in the cafeteria, they'd start with like 2 kids at the table, but found that 4 kids at the table was fine to keep the social distancing. So I'm sure we'll be working out those kind of details. What I really appreciate from what I'm hearing today and all of the work that's been done up to this point is a lot of really thoughtful work being placed in for our district in terms of how this hybrid model would work. I know that you're looking at best practices across a number of different areas in conversations with others. One of the things, though, that I would want to add to what Dr. Malloy was talking about in terms of, families choosing hybrid versus remote for their students. I have no doubt that the safety procedure is going to be put in place for our students who come back to school to feel safe, and the procedures will be there. These students inform me that in terms of mask wearing, never a doubt. The kids themselves were telling each other to keep their masks on and keep the social distancing as best they could. So that's all positive news, I felt. But the one part that I thought was kind of critical as families are making this choice is really to take your own student and their learning process into account as well. And it may seem a little counterintuitive, but if your student needs more structure, they're probably better staying in remote. If they need more of the social time and that direct contact with their teachers, that's great for the hybrid. However, the async time is the part that the structure becomes a little bit more self-aware, more independence to it. What I found with the students I was talking to, for instance, is even as teachers prepare lessons for the async time, depending upon how students work, sometimes they can get that work done in a half hour. Another student might take 4 hours to do the same amount of work, depending upon how they work. And if they're not really good at working independently, then our remote structure with, the way that synchronous work with the teacher fits in might be better for some of them. And I can't say which is better, which is worse, but I really come down to making sure that students and families really talk this out to see really on a number of different factors what might be best for your students. And John, you even said at one point, it may be that if you've got multiple students in your household, maybe the same solution isn't best for both. And I know that puts a lot of pressure on families, but just as we're doing as a school district, we really would hope that our families are taking their students into account as their primary consideration and then figure out how to work all logistics around what's best for them. So that was my comment.
Okay. And Heather may be the one to help answer this question. I had parents asking me about, well, when hybrid's fine, but when can we go to full in person? So basically 24, 28, 30, whatever to a class. So 5 days a week, back to quote unquote normal. And I believe, John, you had indicated earlier that somebody had facetiously made a comment that when we get to the green tier, and there is no green tier, it stops at yellow, if I understand correctly. And even at yellow, the 4 to 6 feet distancing rule is still going to apply. Is that still a correct statement?
So I'll start and then maybe Heather can jump in. My understanding, which is why I'm going to ask Heather, who is here, is that the 4 to 6 feet requirement is the reason we're starting in hybrid. I've said publicly, if the 4 to 6 feet requirement was no longer there, we would go full-time face-to-face. But Heather, maybe you have other thoughts that need to be added that adjust what you just heard me say from an expert point of view.
No, that's correct, right? That's correct, because as long as there's COVID out there, that's unchecked. We think that there's risk of transmission. So I think it's really about what the positivity rate is in the community. And as long as we're on tiers, we think that there's still transmission in the community. And so we're still gonna recommend. So I don't really think it is facetious. I do think when we're in the green tier and we're not on COVID watch, I think that's when you can expect that there's less strict guidance.
Got it. So just to make sure everybody's understanding, when we get down to the yellow, assuming at this point the county gets down to the yellow, that still is going to require social distancing requirements will be in place, which makes it impossible for the district to go back to a 5 day a week, 24 to 30 in a classroom like we used to have.
Yes, that's my understanding as it is right now, because that means there's still community spread.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure that everybody watching understood that, because as soon as we finish this meeting tonight, we will all get emails going, well, why can't we go back full time 5 days a week, 30 in a class? And I just want to try to make it as crystal clear as possible. So I think for staff, I want to say thank you. I think you've done a phenomenal job working with all the stakeholders, our teachers, our classified employees, our parents, our students, and the community groups, and your Dr. Malloy's medical cabinet, so to speak, from the community. I think you've done a phenomenal job. We're going to roll out hybrid in as effective a way as possible for those that want it, without diminishing the quality of the instructional program being provided in the distance learning model. And I think you've done a phenomenal job. I want to get back to full-time as soon as possible, but I also understand the limitations that get us there. So we go for the things that we can do to the best of our ability, and that's a partial in-person experience through hybrid and doing it the best we can without diminishing the quality that I think staff, for the most part, our parents, for the most part, think we're doing a fairly good job in the distance learning model, with the full recognition that some students are not thriving in a distance learning model at all. They need that personal contact with the teachers and with their fellow students in an in-person experience. So I think you guys have done a phenomenal job, a great presentation. I think our community will be pleased with, with what you have to talk to them tonight. Do we have any other questions? Because we then have to get with Denise with a thought exchange question. Nope, not hearing any.
Rachel wants to
Oh,
jump in.
Rachel, yes.
Rachel, yes.
I did have one question related to the scenarios about for quarantining that were listed in the presentation. Is there an expectation on our families that if they were in any of those circumstances that they would report to the school? Or do we just have to kind of guess what's going on if they're not at school?
Do you want my, yeah, is this
Heather, I think
for
this
me?
is- Please.
Yeah. So there's HIPAA laws and everything. Nobody's mandated to report. There's some bills where, employers are going to have to report to employees that there was a case on site, but you'll never know who it is. You shouldn't know who it is. You'll only know that you were a close contact. Most of the time people can figure it out. But no, if somebody has been off campus and not been at the location, there's no mandated reporting. And sometimes they might be a positive case and might not notify you. Is that in your declaration that they must let you know out of curiosity?
Thank you for that question. Danny, could you jump in and let me know if we've actually, I think we were afraid to go there because of what Heather just said, but you might have some information that I'm not pulling back at the moment.
As far as the communication between county health and schools, it's really, it's not one way, but as far as detailed information, we would collect that for the contact tracing piece. We're sending it to the schools group at county for them to help us investigate and let us know. I think I've heard a couple of different things with regard to county health giving, if something is reported directly to county health, us getting that detailed information. I think we would get the fact that something has occurred. And if there was a close contact, and if it occurred on campus, then there's a little bit more information sharing going on. But if it was from community spread or from a family member or something like that, that is not related to school district functions, we would just be aware that the case was in place, but we wouldn't necessarily have all the details. That was my understanding of how.
And I think to be very explicit too, we have asked our families to let us know if they're dealing with a case of COVID.
That was really my question. I didn't
Yeah.
think we could mandate it, but
No
I was
mandate,
hoping
we
that we could nicely encourage it just
Yeah,
for the sake of our
We'll
staff.
be doing that, but we
Yeah.
can't mandate. I think that's the quicker way to answer it.
And that was really my question,
I
was would we
misunderstood.
be encouraging?
But I want to thank you, Danny. You did a great job of describing the process. Good for you.
That's because Danny goes to all the contact tracing training sessions. Can you
Great
tell?
job.
Any other questions from board members?
Just one real quick one. I just wanted to make sure that because since families, right, are being asked to declare for the rest of the year, so this is through May, right, to June, and I work with a lot of, I think, especially seniors in high school. So in order to make, I think a decision, I was just wondering that they will be students who decide to stay remote for their own reasons, right? Families who do, will have the same opportunities for small group or activities and things like that in person as the hybrid students would. And I'm only thinking for, let's say, some, spring events that usually happen and that might be happening this spring, like dances or, well, probably not dances, but like certain different activities, especially for seniors, although the other grades too. So anyway, about small group opportunities.
The best way to answer that tonight is we don't have a firm answer yet, but we understand that there will be realities that we really want our kids to be connected to campus, even if they're remote. We will have to follow all public health guidance around large groups and indoors and all those kinds of things. We couldn't necessarily do it in the same way as those who are hybrid. I want to be very clear, because that actually would mean they should say they want to be hybrid, and then we'll organize that way. But for those who feel they should stay remote, we're looking at those opportunities. We will be able to communicate to the community shortly, but we aren't in a position to do that right now. But I promise you this, we will not be bureaucratic. We will not lack compassion. We understand that if things are happening, our kids need to be there safely and in a way that honors all the guidance. So just let me make that commitment, and then we'll figure it out going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. Again,
John, I would just want to clarify for Susanna's question. So something like PSAT tests in the springtime would be administered to whether you were on campus or you're remote. You'd have those same opportunities for those type of things, as well as some of the small group type of things that occur after school hours.
Yes, I think to summarize, our kids, even if they're remote, need access to their community. We need to do that in a way that honors all the guidance, or we're defeating the purpose. It won't be the same as hybrid, but we're open to exploring when that's healthy, when that makes sense, and frankly, when it's required. PSAT is a perfect example. So we're taking that back. You have our commitment. And if people who are making this decision this week really want to be remote but are afraid of this answer, I give you our word that we'll figure it out. It can't be, as I said, a free, like everything is going to be back on campus, but we will certainly figure it out and come up with some options between now and June, especially for those kids who are experiencing milestones.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I think maybe some evidence there is how you presented both options, Dr. Malloy, is that you're not preferring either option. You're putting forward two options that are both high quality, and one is not preferred or looked down upon. They're equal. And so to the extent that you can honor participation on site, you would, because you're recognizing both options.
Okay. Any further questions? Hearing none. We have Denise is lined up to share the thought exchange question, and we'll begin the thought exchange.
Thank you so much. Over to Denise.
Thank you all very much. My name is Denise Jennison. I'm a communications specialist here in the Sanibel Valley Unified School District, and I'm going to introduce you to the Thought Exchange part of our program. Thought Exchange is a crowdsourcing platform, and some of you may have used Thought Exchange with us as a district. We have successfully used it several times now. What it means is that we're going to be interactive this evening. We're going to use a live exchange to hear from everyone on the live stream in real time. So in just a moment, I'm going to bring up an invitation so you can access the exchange. And then after accessing the exchange, you're going to be asked to share your thoughts or your questions anonymously in response to our open-ended question. And then we're going to ask you to consider and rate the thoughts of other people who have contributed on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. Use 5 stars if the thought resonates with you and you'd like to hear more about it tonight from Dr. Malloy and or his staff members. Use 1 star if it isn't as important to you and you don't need to hear more about it right now. So after about 6 minutes, I'm going to close the exchange so that Dr. Malloy and his staff can respond to the top thoughts that are highly rated, which means we're going to respond to the thoughts that are important to the group that is here tonight participating. And then when we're done, I will reopen the exchange and we will leave it open until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning so that if you have additional questions or you would like to go in and rate some additional thoughts, or for those folks who weren't able to join us this evening, they can go in and add their thoughts and questions and ratings as well. So I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen, which will have the invitation on it. There we go. So our question tonight is, what are the questions that you have for the next phase of our reopening plan? It's a very broad question intentionally. We would like to know what questions you have and what you're thinking. The way that you join us is, well, there's two different ways. You see the QR code on the screen. You can use a mobile device to take a picture of that QR code. Just open your camera app and point it at the QR code. A drop-down will appear at the top of your screen. Click that on, it takes you right into the thought exchange. Your other option is to open a new browser, go to tejoin.com and enter the 9-digit code that you see here on the screen. Either way gets you into the same place. So as you start to enter the thought exchange, I'm just going to share a few more things with you, and then we're going to be silent just for a few minutes to give you an opportunity to gather your thoughts and questions and get them into writing into the exchange. There's 3 steps to participate in the exchange. There's the share, the star, and the discover stage. We ask, of course, that you please be respectful and constructive when you share your comments. You can share as many questions or thoughts as you like. Everything you enter into the exchange is completely anonymous. Whether you enter a thought, a question, or a rating, it's done anonymously. We are using machine moderation tonight to monitor the contributions to the thought exchange. The machine moderation, the intelligence is set up to capture rude comments, also to capture proper nouns. So we ask that you please do not use people's names when you're entering your comments into the system. In the star step, where you consider and rate the thoughts of other people, we'd ask you to rate about 20 to 30 thoughts. I want to emphasize that we do not expect you to rate every thought. That would not be possible. It's not an expectation, but if you rate about 20 to 30 thoughts, that's enough for you to see a pretty good variety of the perspectives that are being shared by other people who are joining us in our exchange tonight. So as we see these numbers start to climb, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start the timer and give you some time to participate in silence. I'd just like to mention that if you missed the QR code on our previous screen, you can still join us anytime by going to tejoin.com and entering the 9-digit code that you see on the screen. That will remain up on the screen. You can join us at any time. We're approaching the halfway point in our silent time for entering thoughts. New thoughts are still coming in. If you've already moved on to discover, please go back and do some more rating in the star step. Remember, we recommend that you rate about 20 to 30 thoughts. Okay, we have approximately 1.5 minutes left. If you haven't moved on to the STAR step, I'd like to ask you to go ahead and please do that now. We'll give you this last 1.5 minutes or so to rate thoughts. And what I'm going to do is close the exchange so that we can review the results together. Then after the event, I will reopen the exchange, and it's going to stay open until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, so that you would go back in and enter thoughts or questions that might occur to you later. You can also continue to rate thoughts and questions. Also gives those folks who were not able to join us tonight an opportunity to enter their thoughts and questions and do some rating as well. So it will reopen when we're done, and it will be open until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Okay, our time is up. So I'm going to go ahead and close the exchange for now. We will reopen it. We'll start to have Dr. Malloy and his staff address your questions.
Thank you so much, Denise. And I will start. And if I reach a question where I need some help from the team that's here with me, I certainly will ask them. So let me start. Infection rate increases in December and continues through winter. What is the district's plan? So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we will now be making all of the changes so that those who wish to be in-person learning will be there, and those who wish to remain hybrid will be there. Excuse me, those who wish to be in remote will be there. So we're now kind of in the places we need to be. So remote will continue on like they are now. And hybrid, if there was some reason that the state or the county said we had to close, then they could move back into remote as a class. If things got better, as we heard earlier, they could move into full-time face-to-face instruction as a class, because we've already made, as I said, the disruptions or changes that are required at this time. So again, it is our intention to open on January 5th, unless directed otherwise by the authorities such as public health or the state. Next question. Denise, can you help me there? Oh, I'm sorry, you've given it to me. So no, I think I need your help.
I'd be happy to. Let me read the question. It says, is it possible for a teacher to teach both in-person and remote at the same time to avoid changing teachers for high and middle school students?
Thank you for the question. We will only use that strategy, as I said in the presentation, for those very selective electives where there are specific credentials. Some have said, well, why can't you do that for all classes? And this is the challenge. For someone who wishes to remain remote for the next rest of the school year, it becomes very challenging if the only mode of instruction is what we would call the video conferencing piece. The other challenge is we don't want those kids who are coming to school in person to come to school only to be doing their learning like they are at home. So there's two ways of looking at this. If you're coming back to hybrid, you are coming back to face-to-face instruction for a few days a week, a Monday similar to what you have now, and I'm talking secondary, and some asynchronous time that we've discussed. If it's elementary, of course, it's AM, PM. But I think that to say that we would use that strategy for all courses and at all times, as I said, isn't great for everyone. So we've separated remote and hybrid, with the exception of those electives in secondary where we need to bring them together.
Okay, if a child is sick in the hybrid model, how will they learn at home for 2 weeks?
So if the entire class has to be home because there may have been an exposure, then we can certainly teach that class as we would in the remote setting now. But if a child goes home and is unwell, we would need to deal with that child like we would if a child gets sick now in school. In other words, work is sent home and such. It's not as though there's a video option for them to receive if they choose the hybrid option. That isn't an option in that model. They would be supported like they would have been pre-COVID if they were ill, needing work sent home. Obviously, the teacher would stay connected and be supportive, but would not be available necessarily for a video setting unless it happens to be that one, it's one of those electives again that I've just described, or two, it happens to be where the teacher is periodically choosing to use video conferencing. And I'm sure that that child at home would be included in that.
Okay, if COVID numbers spike and schools are not allowed to be open in January, will students keep their current distant learning schedule or move to the new distance learning hybrid one?
We are moving forward on January 5th with everything that you've seen. If for whatever reason, and I want to say very minimally, because we are opening on January 5th unless directed otherwise. So saying that, we need to get into the program that will happen for the rest of the year. So all the changes will be made and all of the schedules that you see in this package will be followed. And the only difference would be that for whatever period of time we might be ordered to be remote, that hybrid class would be remote only in that space.
What if the teacher gets COVID and has been teaching?
So if the teacher gets COVID, if you look in our planning guide, we have it's called the decision tree, excuse me. Whether it's a staff member or whether it's a student, it's a person, a human, who we will follow that same process. So I don't want to go through all the details except to say, when you see this presentation, you'll be able to click on the link and it says what happens if there is a potential person who's positive, which means they have the symptoms, whether someone has been determined to be positive. All of those things are there, and it will be followed whether it's a staff member or whether it's a student.
So along that same line then, could you please address the idea of substitute teachers, more specifically substitute teachers in a hybrid model, because they could be mixing with multiple groups of students?
So once again, I think we heard it from Dr. Farntano today. While we are in the red or in the orange tier, we are allowed a little bit more latitude as it relates to cohorts. We're expected to physically distance. We're expected to mask. We're expected, obviously, to follow sanitation requirements. So the substitute teacher could teach following all those requirements.
Okay, what are the criteria being used for how to map student to teacher for hybrid? Keep current teacher, gate students, etc.
I don't think I understand the question, and I can't see it, Denise, so can you read it again?
Yes, what are the criteria being used for how to map student to teacher for hybrid? Keep current teacher, gate students. So how are you placing, what is the criteria you are using to place students under the hybrid model?
Okay, so I think the problem is the gate question confused me. In
Okay.
terms of placing students in the hybrid model, let me answer that question. And then Christine, you might be able to help me with the gate question. So families will declare by the 13th. And then the principal will work closely with his or her staff regarding their own circumstances. And then together it will be determined who within that school will teach remotely and who in that school will teach in hybrid. And it's something that we're going to be asking our school sites to do, because as I said in the presentation, they will be the ones who know the staff and the students the best. In secondary, this is a bit more complicated because we already know about the electives that I've talked about. Those classes stay the same, and there would be video conferencing to keep them together. For other classes, if the majority of the class certainly wanted the same thing, we would have a lot easier time in terms of the timetabling. But for many of the courses that aren't that highly specialized elective, and where there may be very different desires in that community, and there isn't only one or two teachers who has that credential, we may actually need to rely on computer scheduling, just like we do at the beginning of the school year. But Christine, do you have anything to offer on the gate question?
Sure, absolutely. So as we do within the traditional year, our students in grades 3, 4, 5 who qualify for GATE, we actually cluster our students. All of our teachers are able to teach our students who are labeled and identified gifted and talented, but it would go back to the declaration numbers and how students choose. And then we would have our site principals do their very best, as they do in any given year, to cluster our GATE students accordingly. And then our students who are in the academic talent program, as Dr. Malloy shared earlier, would access the program via video conferencing if they choose to say remote, and some come in person, so they would still have access to their current program and teacher.
Next question, Denise.
What is the teacher interaction time difference between remote and hybrid options for secondary school students? This person is trying to understand the asynchronous educational impact of hybrid versus today's remote.
So the important piece when we look at what our remote expectations were in August, and I again realize that teachers have gone way above and beyond. If you look at our expectations from August, teachers would be online with your children 60% of the time. And within that 60%, they would have some large group time, some small group time, and some individual time. So even students might even have less time than that. But one of the things we've learned, and again, I'm grateful to our educators, many of whom might be online right now, they went way beyond that. And so some of you have shared with us that you've experienced pretty much 100% of the time, many days, in terms of this particular structure. So similarly, in the hybrid time, students would not have 100% with their teacher. And yet we're leaving it with the teacher, similar as we did with remote, to determine what's best for the kids. So I actually can't answer the question that literally yet, because what it means is, for sure, days like it is now, and 2 days a week for high school. And then for elementary, it is either AM or PM, with some teacher time in the afternoon, but it won't be the same if what you're experiencing at the moment is 100% in your remote learning time. But I'm going to ask Christine if one of your if a member of your team might be able to be a bit more granular about anything beyond what I've just said.
Sure, absolutely. I think you definitely captured it in the essence of the two, but I will turn it over to Debbie Pettish, our Director of Curriculum, who's been working on this with a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Christine. So no, I think Dr. Malloy, you said it really, really well. I think that it really is going to depend on the situation, but our teachers, as we saw in remote, have been working extremely hard to make it be successful, and we have absolutely no doubt that they will continue to work hard. We have a lot of professional development opportunities planned over the next couple of months, because we do know that there is a perception, as Dr. Malloy has talked about, that the asynchronous time isn't going to be of high quality, and that's just simply not true. There's a lot of activities we can do during that time that would provide structure and accountability for students. So I feel like we need to, as a community, look at that those asynchronous days when students are at home a little bit differently, because they're not going to be like it was in the spring.
And if I thank you for that, Debbie. And if I could just close this question by saying that in the spirit of candor and transparency, I do need to end it by saying it isn't 5 days a week. And teachers will be provided the opportunity to meet student needs using their professional judgment. And I don't want to paint a picture that it is different than that, because that would mean that we might be heightening your expectations when we're not able to deliver it. But I think I'll emphasize Debbie's last point. We know we have work to do to help our families understand that asynchronous is not unstructured, but the teacher may not be there. And that's why, if that's something that you are uncomfortable, or I should say the teacher may not, let me emphasize may not be there, because days in asynchronous, he or she won't be there. So you need to make your decisions based upon that reality.
Will teachers be teaching both the kids who are in person and the kids who are remote learning?
So our expectation is this will only happen when we're talking about one of those highly selective, or not highly selective, but those electives or those elementary programs where we're relying on certain teachers with key credentials. That's where it must happen. It will not happen for any other aspects of the remote program. No other aspects of the remote program will be done in that way unless your child is in one of these programs. But within the hybrid model, we're going to leave it to our teachers to decide what's best for the kids, because it's the teacher's responsibility to ensure that the instruction is planned for the in-school days as well as the asynchronous days. And we know that many of them have already shared great examples. And we will be sharing with you through the package that you get other examples of what this asynchronous day could look like. We've done some videos with some of our teachers and such that I hope it will paint the picture even clearer.
How do you determine if a teacher is remote or hybrid?
So it starts with the parents and the families and the students deciding what they want to do. Then the principal takes that information and they now know who wishes to be remote and who wishes to be hybrid. As I shared in the workshop setting, in the elementary setting, there'll be another question that allows the principal to have a bit more flexibility if you're keeping your teacher is the most important quality, so that you can that. We're not promising it, but we're certainly going to try. I mean, our goal is to try to minimize interruption. Then the principal will meet with each of the staff members to determine if there are any other considerations that need to be dealt with related to that staff member's concerns or consideration, family members and other circumstances. I've said to the staff, and I'll say it again, and I've probably answered this question before, but I want to keep repeating it. We care about our staff. We understand they also have family circumstances, but we don't get the same choice as our families do. You start the process and we follow. But we are going to try to do our very best to meet the needs of our staff while we're doing it. So right now, our staff knows that they are expected to be on campus on January 5th. If there's a medical consideration, obviously, they don't need to be on campus and they will be remote. For those who then feel they need to be remote because of circumstances, we're going to listen to that. And of course, there will be some on campus, staff on campus who are okay to be back. We're going to hope that through a collaborative process, we can work that through. Do we know yet how that will go? That's the next step. As you've always heard me since I arrived in San Ramon Valley, I create with my team plans, and then we implement the plan in phases. October was the negotiations, the consultations, landing at the program month. Early November is communicating the program, answering all questions, engaging students, staff, and parents so that a declaration can be made. As soon as the 13th comes and we see the data and we provide that data to each school community, so the principal with the principal's team working with parents and kids can figure out the next step, that will be the work that goes on at the end of November into early December. So I think where I'm going with this answer is we'll continue to communicate in the way we have over the last 2 months as we move into the time right after declarations.
Are students going to still be on devices in person?
I've been getting this question because I think there's some beliefs out there that whether the student comes to school or whether the student stays at home, it's going to look like a Zoom classroom like we're doing in remote. And that isn't our expectation. There may be days where that's the case, especially in those electives again, where home and school are together. I keep making that very clear statement so that it's clear in people's minds. But we also, in that in-person space, expect our staff to engage students to be face-to-face in that small group. That's one of the things that we believe makes hybrid attractive. It's not 5 days a week, but it is a small group of 15. And our expectation is not that students would simply bring their computer to school, to do remote learning or stay at home to do remote learning. The people who like that option should keep remote learning as your strategy. I hope that's clear about kind of the student side of this, as well as the teacher or staff side of the question.
Great. How soon will we know whether our students' teachers will be changing?
So our goal, but I'm again not somebody who likes to commit unless I know that we can operationalize it. After we see the declarations come in November 13th, my guess is we're going to have to make some phone calls on November 16th and November 17th. And before the Thanksgiving week, I believe we're going to have a sense on how complex this next step is going to be. And once I see the complexity with our team, what the next steps will be, then we're going to communicate to our community. Our goal is that you will know those changes before the winter break, especially so that there can be some transition for students and also some transition for staff who have been teaching your kids if those changes do need to be made.
This question has been asked a bit, but I think that what you could focus on in this question is whether or not students are going to be able to switch between hybrid or remote.
So the answer again is, for the most part, no. The declaration is binding. If you wish to change your declaration, we would certainly either put you on a wait list or we might try to find you a program in another school if that's what you want. But the notion of switching back and forth isn't part of this. It's just too complicated. And frankly, it's also not effective for students to be moving back and forth. So the question though, if the student is gone for a couple of weeks because they are sick, I know the parents would be worried that the support we usually provide might not be enough. But unfortunately, that is part and parcel of this particular hybrid strategy, that no, they can't switch to remote unless they go on a wait list and then go to remote permanently for the rest of the year, wherever we have a space.
If the county cases continue to increase through the winter, will the board reconsider opening in January?
So I won't speak for the board, but what I will say is this. The board has given us a direction to open on January 5th. We're organizing, as I said earlier, to be sure that we have the hybrid cohorts and we have the remote cohorts. If the state or the county tell us to close for whatever reason, we will stay in those cohorts and we will do what we're told. If the board wishes to make a decision to change their direction, it's always in the board's purview to do so. But I would have to leave that up to the board to decide if they would choose to do that.
If students have a COVID-like symptom, such as a cough, are they expected to quarantine and miss school, or can they still participate remotely?
So once again, in our reopening guide, there's some very clear directions regarding symptoms and fever and such. And we would ask you to keep your child home. We would ask you to test your child if you wanted them back, or to get the note from the doctor that they are clear. So there is a way back to school if it's just symptoms. If it's an actual exposure, then it means we do have to quarantine. If an entire class is quarantined, as I've mentioned, then we can provide remote instruction. But if for whatever reason your child is the only one that's home, then we need to follow the supports that I have communicated previously.
Will we know beforehand where our teachers are headed, remote versus hybrid?
I've been asked this question probably the most, and the answer is no, but let me explain why. This is a very giant puzzle, and one that we need to get right because it involves your kids, our students. We can't have everything at play or in play at the same time. We need to understand what families want first, and then we will staff accordingly. So unfortunately, no, you will not know where your teachers are headed prior to your making your declaration. In elementary, it's a little simpler because you could mark that box that I spoke to you about. But in secondary, unfortunately, with the number of teachers involved, it just won't be the case.
How many teachers, intervention people, aides will a student see during in-person, or will it be just limited to one teacher?
So no, it won't be limited to one teacher, as we heard around the notion of cohorts. So while we are in red or orange, or hopefully at some point go to yellow, we are able to be open with a little bit more license with cohorts. So in an elementary class, there would certainly be one teacher. There may be a paraeducator. There may be some other aides, but all of us in classrooms would be expected to follow the physical distancing and the masking and such. In secondary school, the kids would have the multiple teachers just like they do now. So again, I think what's most important, and I understand the question, because for the period of time we were in purple, the definition of cohort was that which we were hearing the most from public health. Now that we aren't in purple, that definition has been relaxed a bit, as long as we don't relax the other requirements that we've been talking about.
What if we choose to follow our teacher in hopes she stays remote, but learn she ends up being hybrid and we aren't comfortable with that? Can we then opt out?
At this point, you need to make your best decision and declare. And truthfully, as I said, we can't do our planning without it. And I'm very grateful to be in a district where we have this challenge that people don't want to lose their teachers. That says brilliant things about our teachers. And I'm so happy to hear that. However, what I also want to promise is that we'll do our very best, should there be a shift, to help your child and to work through the transition. I know it never happens this large scale, but every year teachers may need to leave for various reasons. And there does need to be a change, and we do work through it. So again, unfortunately, we won't be able to plan that way. And I wish there was a way around that, because I hear why and I understand it. We just can't figure out how we would do that and still get to January 5th in an organized fashion.
Do you have a backup plan if too many teachers do not ever go to on campus? If not offered remote, they may take leaves of absences.
And that unfortunately is something that we need to work through, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I think we've been working really closely with our staff, that they understand the parameters of this direction. We're working really hard to be sure that we are communicating, as public health has taught us, what would keep us safe. We've made a commitment to be absolutely clear about those requirements and to work with our families to ensure that they are followed. And then we're asking you, our parents, to make your decisions. And then we're going to try to pull all of this together. And I am hoping that it lands in a place where we can make the good decisions going forward. But at this point, we will cross that next bridge when we come to it. And if there are any questions or concerns regarding that, we'll bring those forward to our board and to our public at that time.
I have children in elementary and middle school. If there's a quarantine in one class, will the other children also need to quarantine? Siblings is what they're talking about.
Thanks for that question. And though I do believe I know the answer, it's in the tree. I'm going to ask Danny Hillman if you would answer this question, because it's related to the sibling rule.
Yes. The short answer is not necessarily. It really is going to depend on the exposure that has been reported in the classroom. But as far as siblings go within the same household, it is not an automatic that the other children in the household have to quarantine also. If the exposure was from a classroom setting, so let's say the elementary student was exposed, would the sibling that's at home in middle school have to quarantine? Not necessarily. County contact tracing will help us determine that, and then we would communicate with the family after that investigation.
I'm just going to possibly clarify. Dr. Malloy, would you like to clarify what Danny said? Just his voice was very garbled on my feed. I don't know if it was for others as well.
It was
So
garbled.
I'll simply say that it's not, family members will not be excluded. It would depend on if they too had symptoms. And of course, then families would need to follow requirements, but on face value, just because there may have been an exposure in one classroom doesn't necessarily mean that siblings would be impacted by that. It's all about the symptoms. It's all about following up with the symptoms. And it's not just carte blanche, you're out if a family member needs to be out.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. Will teachers be able to decide if they want to stream into their class? It could mean more live instruction time was the follow-up to that.
So I think you're talking about teachers will have the opportunity to decide how they want to use video conferencing for the hybrid model. So that will be theirs to decide. But I want to be clear because I'm not setting teachers up. Sometimes that's a good strategy to use. Other times it's not a good strategy to use. And this is where, again, I trust our teachers working with our students and communicating with our parents on how they decide and how they communicate the strategies they're using. But yes, they would be able to use video conferencing as they see fit based upon how they want to operate their class. It's not a system requirement, but it's certainly a strategy that we are supporting. But again, it is required in those specialized programs that I've talked about. And I hope you don't mind that I'm repeating myself. It's just that this is so much information. It's very complex. And I think it might save our principals who will be getting all these questions, because that's where we're asking you to go through the declaration process, as long as this period of time where we have hundreds and hundreds of participants, that I'm being as clear as possible.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Malloy. And I should say that the questions that I see coming through the feed are very similar in nature. The themes are repetitive. So while some of the questions might sound repetitive, we are seeing them rise to the top over and over again. The next question is, will there be consequences for hybrid families who purposely hide positive COVID cases?
And the answer is no. I mean, we're going to ask for families on the honor system to be upfront about what's happening. We will obviously ask kids to be home when there are symptoms, but I can't suggest there would be any further consequences from a school district than that.
This question is about social distancing. The CDC social distancing guidelines state at least 6 feet. Why is SRVUSD okay with 4 feet of distancing?
Great question. So this is part of the challenge when you look at the American Pediatrics Association, when you look at the CDC, when you look at the state, and when you look at the county. So many people will pull different pieces of research and say, but what about? And so I always go to the place where we're expected to go first, which is the county. And when the county says 4 to 6 feet, this is what they mean. 6 feet face to face, which means the desks are probably closer to 4 feet together, but the faces of our kids are 6 feet apart. So 4 to 6 feet is still following the same thing. It's just a bit semantics, because we're expected to set up our classrooms so the kids are 6 feet apart, face to face.
Will a child actually be removed from the hybrid model if they continually ignore mask wearing and social distancing requirements? Also, what if the child's parents or other family members ignore these same rules and put other students at risk?
I can't speak to the second one, because I think this is an issue that we all face with whatever personal choices families are making, because we are near others when we go to places like stores and such. So I can't answer that. But what I can answer is, when you receive the package, there are responsibilities that parents must agree to and must sign off on. And as a school district, we will be strict in terms of these requirements. And the reason we can be strict is because we are offering 2 programs under state law, which are valid and effective programs. And that's the reason why a student who is unwilling or unable to comply cannot remain in the hybrid model. And again, we understand that some families might be very upset to hear that, but we have the responsibility to ensure that we are keeping schools safe for all staff and students. And these are the required components to make that happen.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. It says, for full remote students, is there a chance they will be placed in a combo class with other grades in addition to possibly losing their home school?
Let me put one fear to rest. Sometimes I get questions that those of you who wish to remain remote feel that you're going to be in a circumstance where you are not given what you might be moved to another school and all that. This is what we need first. The data is going to tell us exactly how to proceed. In some schools, if the data from September is the data we receive now, many of the students are going to want to be remote, and we may have bigger challenges with those who wish to return. And the flip side could also be true. Our commitment is in this order. We understand our kids need as much support as possible. Disruptions are hard. Your school community is important to you. Leaving that school community would be very challenging. So we're going to try to avoid all of that in terms of our work going forward. I will be able to speak more clearly after the declarations come in, but please do not think, just because you've picked one choice or the other, that somehow you are going to land in a situation that is perceived as less effective for your child. I'll be able to speak more probably after Thanksgiving regarding what the data is telling us. Your principal will be in a position to speak more about what your actual school data is showing and will be in close touch with you. But since it's becoming 6:30, I'm going to bring this particular part of our evening to a close with a couple of comments. First of all, special thanks to our board for your engagement throughout, but also in the workshop that started this meeting. By being a part of that workshop together, we were able to share the information that our families then were able to use to ask these questions. Secondly, the thought exchange will reopen and stay open till tomorrow. And what we will do is ensure that any of our frequently asked question documents include the themes that you're asking about. You are going to receive tomorrow all the materials that we've suggested. And I'm going to be honest, it's a lot. We have presentations, we have links, we have videos. We will have as much information as you might need. But we're also going to have information in abbreviated forms for those of you who want to look and think quickly, because we understand that not everybody has the time to really go through everything that we're providing. Please know that our principals, we've worked so closely with them. They are amazing, and they are there to help with their assistant principals in the schools that have them, of course, and our other staff as well. We know that we're now ready for the next step. I'm confident that everything we've promised up to this point has been delivered. I have confidence that we will continue to deliver going forward, but the only way we're going to be able to do this is if we keep talking, learning, understanding the issues, and moving forward. Thank you to our board. Thank you to our families. If there are any staff members on this particular call, I know you were with us together at 3:15, so thank you as well. Many of the district team I'm seeing in this, all of the Brady Bunch pictures here, you have been working around the clock, and I actually mean that literally. And I think on behalf of our community, I want to say how grateful I am to you as well. These aren't easy days. There will be challenges. There's going to be some issues we're going to have to work through, but I hope that as we move our way towards January 5th safely and effectively, that we continue to build that type of confidence that you, our families, need in us as we're doing our work for your children. Thanks for your time. Have a great night. Bye for now.
Thank you, everybody. All right, this nothing else coming before the board. We are adjourned.